Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're doing an introduction video to a new book that we're starting. And I just wanted to introduce the book. So before we begin, I want to thank you, everybody, for being here. And if you like what we do, please do consider checking out our other book clubs. We have our health book clubs on Wednesdays and financial book clubs on Thursdays. And we put all the books that we've read in the past, as well as the current ones on YouTube, in a playlist. So you guys can just download it and listen to it when you're stuck in traffic or exercising or walking your dog or doing laundry or whatever it is that you do. And we have other contents in there as well. So please do check it out and like and subscribe and comment. We'd love to hear from you. Also consider signing up for our free monthly newsletter as well. And if you want to support us further, I will leave all the relevant links in the description box below for you guys to check it out. And we do appreciate you guys supporting us in whatever way, shape, or form that you guys can do. Um, we appreciate it very, very, very much. So, all right. So, um, there's a little backstory with this introduction and inspiration for this particular book, but I will start with the title. So, the title well, let's start with the backstory and the inspiration. So, this book I've had for a while, probably a few years. It's been in my on my bookshelf. I've taken it down um, and looked at it, flipped through it, put it back in my bookshelf, and that kind of happened, back and forth for a few times. And I'm kind of wishy-washy about whether to read it or not. So in my last book, after I finished my our last book club, um, I was kind of at a loss in a way in terms of, what do I want to read next? So I said to the universe, I said, okay, whatever book you want me to read, just give me a sign. And this book, I flipped through it. There's a lot of charts and things, and I don't know how to read them, for those who are just listening, not just looking at the camera. So I was kind of hesitant that way. And then it's kind of controversial in a way for today's, uh, geopolitical, whatever you like to call it. But anyways, so I said to the universe, just, whatever book you want me to read, give me a sign. So one day I was listening to a podcast, and usually with any kind of podcast, I would have it in the background, sort of like background noise, if you will. And I'm usually multitasking, uh, either doing paperwork, paying bills, things of that nature. And I just have the podcast running in the background, just kind of listening peripherally, if you will. So I was doing that one day, and I was listening to a podcast the podcaster was interviewing a finance person. And they were just talking away, and all of a sudden, I wasn't looking at my computer, which is where the podcast is going on. I was looking at my paperwork. So I had my head down, looking at my paperwork and just kind of listening in the peripherally. And all of a sudden, this finance guy who's a guest in the podcast mentioned this book. So my ears perked up. And I looked up at the computer screen or the laptop or whatever it is, the podcast. And the finance person was talking about this book, and he was showing the cover of the book to his podcaster interviewer. And it was the exact cover that you see here. If you're on YouTube, you could see the camera. But if not, I'll leave a link in the description box below in terms of the book that I got. But it's the same exact cover. Now, this particular gospel, if you will, have different covers and different interpretations from different authors. And the finance person, showed this book. So to me, that's a sign, you could interpret it any way you want. But for me, it was kind of out of the ordinary because it came from a finance guy. He wasn't even a biblical scholar or whatever it was. He was a finance person and he was talking about this. And he showed the exact cover that I have now. So the cover or the title of the book, I'm not going to read it out loud because it might get me in trouble with YouTube, which it's not the first time, but anyways, if you take simple gematria, which means if you take A equals 1 and B equals 2 and C equals 3 and D equals 4 and all the way to Z or Z, if you're British, which equals 26, the 17th letter of the alphabet is that letter. And this is one of the more, it is said, and I don't know for sure, but because I've never been to the Vatican and I've never looked at lost biblical books and stuff like that, but it is said there are 77, interesting number, 77 lost books of the Bible, or books that didn't make it into the Bible as we know it today. So if you look at the 17th letter, uh, just take that equivalent letter, and you can kind of guess what the letter is about. Okay, so this is the earliest gospel, and this was interesting because it is, if you look at the subtitle, it's called An Introduction to the Original Stories and Sayings of Jesus. Now, just a note about Christ, Jesus Christ. There's a lot of controversy over him. From what I understand, and this is just my take on it, Jesus was an ascended masters. Now, ascended masters are highly spiritually evolved beings. They could be non-physical or they could be physical. For those who decide to take on the physical form, like Buddha, like Christ, they come with a mission in life, and they know that mission when they were born. And usually the ascended masters, their mission is to elevate the spiritual consciousness or the spiritual evolution of humanity as a whole. So they have a lot of stuff on their shoulders. They have a lot of burden because they're carrying that mission for the whole world. Okay. So they're different than, let's say, our guardian angels or spirit guides, because our guardian angels and spirit guides, their mission is to help individuals evolve spiritually. But for the ascended masters like Jesus Christ and and Buddha and Guan Yin, and there's many, many, a lot of them, their mission is for the whole species. It could be a group of people, it could be for the whole world, it could be, depending on what their mission is. And usually their mission is planned out by their higher soul and their spiritual teachers, way ahead of time. So this is my understanding. Now, there's a lot of controversy about Jesus, the person. I'm not as interested in the person as the message. I think it's more important to listen to the message as opposed to going back and forth about the person. Because, you want to, if you look at yin and yang, the Eastern concept of balance, you want to look at the essence, which is the message. So a lot of, so when I listen to people, I try to listen to the energy of that message or the relevance of that message. So you really want to go back if you can, to the primary source of what they're saying, as opposed to what everybody else is saying about them, right? So that's just my take on it. Um, so I think my thing is the person Jesus is not as important as the message. And I remember my teacher said, if you look at all the major religions in the world, um, well, no, he said, I'm paraphrasing, religion focuses a lot on the differences, but he says we really should focus on the similarities of all the major religions. Because if you look at the messages of all the major religions, it's about love, it's about compassion, it's about respect, it's about um, service to others, if you will. So you want to look at messages like that. I'm not a religious person per se. If you've kind of listened to my podcasts and read my, looked at my book clubs and stuff like that, religion has its place, but at some point you have to go beyond religion because at the end of the day, religion is man-made. The uh, dogmas and not discipline, the dogmas and I forgot what the word was, but anyways, they're all man-made, and that's why we have so many different sects within one religion, right? Interesting word, by the way, sects sounds very similar to sex. One of those things that kind of make you go, right? But I think it's more important to go beyond religion and go into the spiritual messages because, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. God is love. God is good, goodly, godly, right? Um, God is abundant. And whatever uh, definition you put that God is, it could be Jesus for some, it could be nature for some, it could be Allah for some. You know, it doesn't matter because we all come from the same source. So, and for me, this is just my experience. If you study quote unquote God from a energetic perspective or a spiritual perspective or a light perspective, it makes more sense to me than the strict dogma that you hear in Catholicism and all that. So my background is I was raised as a fundamentalist Christian. My parents were, I think they were evangelists. I don't even know what they are because I haven't been to church for a long time. But anyways, I grew up, with my mom saying to me, you better obey me or you're going to burn in hell, kind of thing. I grew up with that. And then I went to 6 years of Catholic school where I was indoctrinated with the Catholicism doctrine. And then after that, I got interested in world religion. So I studied Buddhism, I studied Taoism, not in depth, but like an interest, like a hobby. Um, and then just sort of, got into spiritualists and theosophy and all that stuff. It wasn't until I studied pranic healing and some of the things that my teacher taught, he related back to some of the things that Catholics do that I started to kind of click and make sense. Because some of the rituals that Catholics do have a lot of mystical, esoteric meaning to it that's just not taught currently. And I find that, if you really want to, in my opinion, God is meant to be transformative. Meant to be experienced. It's not meant to be dissected and philosophized and, you know, logicalized like a lot of the uh, religious people do. Not that to bash them or anything, they do have their place because we are, as humans, we do try to understand, we strive to understand, and sometimes, in our effort to understand something, we categorize things and box things in and put little things in boxes and label them. That's what we like to do. And I don't think God is too big for that. So anyways, that's just my little personal history as well as story about the religious aspect of my life. Now, I don't know why the universe wants me to read this, but I'm here to be of service, and maybe the universe thinks this is the time to pick up the book and see what this Jesus is all about, right? If you want to understand something, go to the source, the primary source, which is why I like to, if I hear something talked about over and over and over again, I like to just go to the source and find out what the heck is going on, right? And um, experience for myself what all this hype is about. Is it worth the hype? Is it not? And use your brain cells and just to discern what is true, what is not, what makes sense, what doesn't. So I encourage you guys all to do that. So what I will do is, because this particular book has this letter all over the place, but I'm not going to read the letter. What I will do is, when this letter pops up, uh, I will substitute it with the number 17. So again, if you guys use the simple gematria, which is A equals 1, 2 equals, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, D equals 4, all the way to Z or Z equals 26, you will find the letter that corresponds to the number 17. So what I'll do is I will substitute it with uh, I'll say letter 17. I'll just say it that way. So you guys will know what I'm talking about. Okay. And okay, so let's read the introduction. That's my little story there. And this intro is kind of short. So we'll do a quick read. And this book does a lot of comparisons, which is nice. I uh, I'm not a biblical scholar. I don't know my Bible. I don't even remember. I've got like different versions of the Bible on my bookshelves, but I don't think I've read it back to back. I don't remember. It's been so long. So it's, like a new thing for me all over again. And incidentally, the Bible, there's a lot of controversy over that too. Um, but in my opinion, the Bible can be read and interpreted in many different ways. It can be read as a archaeological history, which is literal. It can be read as a metaphor. It can be read as an esoteric study. It can be read as a genealogy. It can be read as a trust document. It could be read as it could be read in so many different levels, and interpreted in many different levels. So it's just not one way to read the Bible. And whether it's written by man, written by God, I really don't care. again, it's the message that you want to extract out of that book or any book. So read it, take what you like. And most people say leave the rest, but I'd say bracket it, because sometimes information that doesn't resonate with you today might resonate with you a couple months down the line, a couple years down the line, couple decades down the line. You never know. You never know. But don't ever dismiss anything and label it, oh, that's bad, I'm not going to listen to it. Bracket it. File it in your file cabinet at the back of your mind. And your mind, your higher soul will know if it's time to dig that out. Maybe it's not time to dig that out this lifetime. It might be for another lifetime. So the truth is very interesting. It comes in many different levels. Sometimes it comes in little spoon feeding mechanism. Sometimes it comes in a wave of tsunami. Kind of depends where your spiritual evolution is meant to go. So, like I said, I am here. I'm a vessel. I'm here to be of service. And I'm just here for the ride. Ride the wave. Whatever, it might be a little wave. It might be a big wave. It might be a tsunami. But you're just here to have fun, right? And to be of service. So that's my little rant for the day, and we will go ahead and read the introduction. All right. Let me see. I think the camera is close enough to... Okay. Oh, by the way, this particular book is written, I wouldn't say written, but probably interpreted or translated by John S. Kloppenborg. And at the back of the book, if you read a little bit about this gentleman, oh, sorry about the glare, he is a world authority on number 17 and professor of religion at the Department and Center for the Study of Religion, University of Toronto. So he's a Canadian. He is author of Excavating 17, The History and Setting of the Sayings Gospel, The Tenants in the Vineyard, Ideology, Economics, and Agrarian Conflict in Jewish Palestine, and co-editor of the critical edition of 17. So if you guys want to do a deeper dive on him and his works, you guys can check out his books there. Okay, so let's do the introduction now. Okay, so the idea of a collection of sayings of Jesus lying behind the Gospels of Matthew and Luke is not a new idea. Predecessors of the modern notion of 17 have been part of scholarship for 2 centuries now. Yet only recently has the sayings Gospel 17 come to figure in our reconstructions of Christian origins and to make a real difference in how Christian origins are imagined. Throughout much of the 20th century, the two-document hypothesis, the synoptic hypothesis that posits 17, was taken so much for granted that introductions to the New Testament routinely devoted only a few pages to its explanation. It seemed almost a certainty. Alternate hypotheses, if they were considered at all, were often simply brushed aside. Now, thanks to the tireless work of the detractors of the two-document hypothesis, its defenders have had to work harder and more thoughtfully. Perhaps ironically, the fruit of criticism is that the grounds for supposing that Mark is the earliest of the 3 synoptic gospels and that Matthew and Luke used a sayings source in constructing their gospels are better articulated than ever. The two-document hypothesis is still a hypothesis, of course, but it is better theorized and defended as a hypothesis. For almost all of the 19th century and most of the 20th, scholars were satisfied with the idea of a 17, but not much invested its reconstruction. 17 functions functioned as a kind of algebraic unknown that helped to solve other problems, such as the extent and nature of Matthean and Lucan editorial tendencies. To be sure, a handful of scholars undertook their own reconstructions. Adolf von Harnack in 1907, Athanasius Polag in 1979, and Wilhelm Schenk in 1981. Although each was the product of impressive erudition, none had a very significant impact theologically or for the construction of Christian origins. It was not until the mid-1980s that a large project was inaugurated under the auspices of the Society of Biblical Literature to produce a fully documented and collaborative reconstruction of 17. The critical edition of 17 was published in 2000, and Greek English, Greek German, and Greek Spanish versions followed in 2002, making a reconstruction of 17 widely available for the first time. So there is an endnote here if you guys want to do a deeper dive. I will not read the endnote, which is at the back of the book, but this will be noted throughout the book. So for those of you who have the book, you guys are welcome to check that out, but we will not do it here. All right, continue. This reconstruction is not intended to be the last word in reconstructions of 17, but rather a solid basis on which to continue the discussion. The critical edition was compiled in conjunction with a full database of all arguments invoked by scholars on the reconstruction 17 from 1838 up to the present and published as Documenta 17. And there is another endnote about that. Scholars may now survey the entire breadth of scholarship on 17. Sorry about that. I'm going to adjust my book here a minute. Evaluate those arguments and contribute their own. One of the most significant developments in the study of Christian origins is the new willingness of scholars to imagine real diversity at the beginnings of the Jesus movement. The discovery of new extra-canonical gospels in the past 60 years, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of the Savior, the Gospel of Judas, has made it clear that the Jesus movement was variegated and diverse, with early Jesus groups constituting themselves around differing sets of traditions, differing ethnocultural identities, and differing ecclesial practices. While the sayings and deeds of Jesus play an extremely small role in Paul's theology, the death and resurrection of Jesus is central to it. Conversely, some gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas, feature Jesus' sayings to the exclusion of almost everything else, including the death and resurrection of Jesus. Salvation, or as Thomas puts it, quote, not tasting death, end quote, is connected with finding the correct interpretation of Jesus' sayings, not with participation by faith in the death and resurrection of Jesus, as it was for Paul. Matthew and James claim that keeping the whole Torah is incumbent on Jesus' followers. Paul, by contrast, argued that circumcision, one of the key identity markers for Judeans, was not a requirement for Gentile Christians. Such differences are far from incidental. On the contrary, they go to the heart of the various identities of the Jesus groups. Decisions concerning which traditions to privilege and which practices to embrace created multiple Christianities. In this newfound willingness to embrace significant diversity, the Sayings Gospel 17 has found an important place, since it is an instance of a different kind of gospel at the earliest levels of the Jesus tradition. As I will argue in chapter 3, knowing about 17 changes much of the way we think about the development of the earliest gospel telling. Because 17 lacks any direct reference to Jesus' death and resurrection, We can no longer suppose that every literary account of the significance of Jesus had to narrate his death. Moreover, 17, since it is almost certainly from Jewish Palestine, gives us a glimpse of a gospel formulated by Jesus's Galilean followers, quite different in complexion from the diasporic and Gentile Christianities that we know from other sources. Finally, recent scholarship on Christian origins has emphasized that the culture of the Eastern Mediterranean was oral scribal. Reading literacy was very low, which meant that most of the early Jesus people heard stories and sayings performed orally. Texts were composed by those few competent to write, but texts such as 17 were composed to function more like a musical script for performance than a textbook to be read. New understandings of oral scribal interactions and the ways that traditional texts could be adapted and redeployed orally have helped to answer the long-standing puzzle. What happened to 17? 17, the earliest gospel, is intended as an introduction to the sayings, Gospel 17, treating 4 basic questions. Why should we think there was a 17? What did 17 look like? What difference does 17 make? And what happened to 17? Naturally, the curious will want to read more, and there is much more to read on each of these questions. And there is an endnote for that as well. A few readers' notes. First, it is now customary to refer to 17 texts by their Lucan versification. Thus, 17, 620, I would say that's chapter 6, verse 20, right? Is the 17 text that is found at Luke chapter 6, verse 20. This designation, however, does not necessarily imply that Luke's wording represents the wording of 17, or that Luke's relative placement of 17, 620 reflects the original sequence of 17, although it is generally thought that in Luke, the sequence of 17 sayings is less altered than in Matthew. In the few instances where Matthew alone may have preserved a 17 text, the designation 17/Matt is used, e.g. 17/Matt 543 as the 17 text that underlines Matt or Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. Second, I use the term Judean as a noun and an adjective to designate persons of Jewish Palestine in antiquity. This avoids problematic aspects of the English term Jew or Jewish, which has come to refer to Jews only insofar as they were religious. The terms Iudaios, oh, sorry, I butchered that word, and Iudakos, by contrast, were ethnic geographical designators, like Egyptian, Phrygian, or Phoenician. They refer to persons identified with a certain cultural region, Judea, whether or not they currently reside in Judea, the Galilee, or the diaspora. Of course, Iudaioi, oh, sorry, butchered that word, would be likely to observe Judean, would likely, oh, sorry, lost my spot there, would likely to observe Judean customs and to reverence their ancestral god. The term, however, does not have their beliefs or cult exclusively or necessarily in view, but includes a range of features of ethnic identity. Third, the appendix prints an English translation of the critical edition of 17. I have modified the translation in minor ways and added notes where I found myself in disagreement with my fellow editors, James M. Robinson and Paul Hoffman, on matters of reconstruction. Existing biblical translations rarely ensure that a phrase or word translated in one way in one gospel is rendered in the same way in another gospel. with the result that English translations often convey a misleading impression of where the Gospels agree in wording and where they disagree. For this reason, the translation of biblical text here has been frequently modified so that the Greek of Matthew, Mark, and Luke is rendered in such a way that the English reflects the agreements and disagreements that exist in Greek. I'm deeply grateful to Philip Law of Westminster, John Knox, for his kind invitation to write this book and to continue to learn about 17 and Christian origins. I dedicate this volume to my many students, undergraduate and graduate, entering a classroom and embarking on a process of intellectual discovery. Mine and theirs is both a great privilege and a deep satisfaction. Okay. So that is the end of the introduction. So let's look at the titles real quick. I think the titles are pretty simple. So the first chapter is What is 17? The second chapter is Reconstructing a Lost Gospel. The third chapter is What a difference makes. And the fourth chapter is 17, Thomas and James. And then there is the appendix, the sayings, Gospel 17 in English. So we will break all these down to little parts so we can digest it a little bit at a time. And I look forward to reading this actually, and invite you guys to looking forward to you guys joining me on this journey. And I will leave all the relevant links in the description box below. And thank you so much for being here. And we will see you next time in our next book club. Okay, bye-bye now.